Welcome to a spooky Halloween video. Today I'm talking about the scariest thing out there, LGBTQIA plus representation in media. And boy, I'm scared already. I had to re-record those lines at least 10 times because I fumbled at LGBTQIA plus. This is probably also scary to those weirdos on the internet who get mad whenever the SJWs steal their 13-year-old anime titties. This video is about LGBTQIA plus rep, but mostly trans rep, since I feel like these rules can be extrapolated to the other branches of the LGBTQIA plus community. Take a shot every time I say LGBTQIA plus. But before we get into the video, I want to define what is and isn't trans rep and why it's important. I want to stress that trans rep doesn't equal feminine boys, masculine girls, androgyny, or cross-dressers. Trans rep would be characters whose gender identity is different from the gender they were assigned at birth. This is important, so tuck it away in your brain folds. I will say that characters that go against gender norms are great and we need more of them, but please don't claim that it's trans rep because that's just not true. Trans rep would include binary trans characters, non-binary trans characters, gender fluid characters, and agender characters, just to name a few. Because if this was an extensive list, this video would be 2 hours long. Also, another thing is that trans characters don't necessarily have to be hypermasculine, hyperfeminine, etc. There are traditionally masculine trans women and traditionally feminine trans men and non-binary people who can be femme, masc, neither, or a mix of the two, etc. If you've been in online geek communities, you've probably heard rhetoric like forced diversity, pushing a political agenda, and other such nonsense. I'm going to make it as clear as day. That's a load of bullshit. Forced diversity implies that some outside element has included members of a minority group for no other reason than to push an agenda. Here's my argument against that. There's no way of you knowing whether that's the case or not, and if you claim that that's the case, the burden of proof is on you. Also, even if someone was pushing an agenda, it would be one of tolerance. It would be an agenda advocating for the rights of minorities. There's no way of using the forced diversity argument and not being a bigot, because the argument implies that minorities in media are something that is unnatural and can only be in media if someone went out of their way to put them there. My last point is having minorities in media is good because it makes people think it's okay to be a part of that minority group and have friends and family in that group. Got that? Good. Okay, let's go into Chapter 1, Pulling Your Head Out of Your Own Ass. I like to format my videos with establishment and points that gradually get more and more serious, so I'm going to talk about the barest necessity of trans rep. That being, having the fucking spine to call it trans rep. What I mean is, a lot of trans and LGBTQIA plus rep is ambiguous and covered under blankets of metaphor. So that way, if someone complains to the creators can say that it's not LGBTQIA plus rep. They want to have their cake and eat it too, basically, but without putting any of the effort into the representation itself. For example, Rebecca Sugar of Steven Universe fame said that the diamonds from Steven Universe are an allegory for trans people. How the fuck would you know? The answer is, fuck you, you wouldn't unless you were told, because ambiguity is a death sentence for trans rep. Something else that these same creators do is keep the LGBTQIA plus characters as background characters that have little to no development, no agency, and can overall be taken out of the show with little to no change to the overall project. These characters are ignorable. I'm not saying that every character that you write has to have a three-dimensional personality with flaws and a tragic backstory. Any character designer worth their salt knows that a character has to fit a role in the story, and not all roles are created equally. Some of those roles include the sidekick slash best friend, the mentor slash wise comfort figure, the villain, the well-meaning but flawed anti-hero, etc. So if you're going to have an LGBTQIA plus character, make them one of the main characters or a character that the main cast has a lot of respect for. Speaking of character roles, please, for the love of fucking Christ, do not make your LGBTQIA plus characters villains or otherwise villainous. Keep this in mind for later. You'll probably be able to connect the dots with your, brain. I believe in you. With that out of the way, let's go on to Chapter 2, Part 1, Terminology, or why it's important. Terminology and nomenclature are important for representation of really any marginalized group. It helps in the mainstreaming of terminology of that community and redefining terms previously used to oppress minorities. If a term has origins in bigotry or having an outdated definition, then we shouldn't use it. For example, the terms gay and lesbian were made in response to the harmful and oppressive definitions of homosexuality, as well as it being considered a mental disorder because fuck you. So using terms from the community made to combat oppressive and harmful language is something to consider. So if you're going to make LGBTQIA+ characters, make sure that you're using terminology made by the community and not from the outside to describe the community in often offensive ways. With that out of the way, let's move on to Chapter 2, Part 2, Terminology, or what you shouldn't say. Here are some terms that you shouldn't use: transsexual, tranny, transvestite, and trap. Okay, look, I'm gonna have to explain that last one, but just stay with me and let's go into them one by one. Let's start with the middle two since I find them easier to define and explain. Tranny is a slur used to demonize and humiliate trans people and has a negative connotation. Transvestite is a term that describes something similar to cross-dressing, and cross-dressing doesn't necessarily mean that you're a trans person. The definition of transvestite also does not include any mention of gender or gender expression or identity. The term transsexual, on the other hand, is inherently linked to a binary view of gender and is defined as someone born as the opposite sex that they identify as and needing surgery to fix it. Remember when I defined transgender as someone whose gender identity is different from the one they were assigned at birth? Well, I'm very clever with my wording because my definition includes binary and non-binary trans people as well as intersex people with separate gender identities, which is something that transsexual does not include. Not to mention that it's an outdated medical term. It's also worth considering that someone who is very big in the sexology field, but someone who's not big in bed, Mr. Ray Blanchard, suggests that trans people have a sexual desire to transition because the thought of viewing oneself as a woman is arousing. He also believes that gender identity and sexual orientation are linked. I'll go into why this is fucking awful in the next chapters, so again, tuck it away in your brain pockets. So now we're on to the slur trap, and that's what it is, it's a slur. Those of you in anime communities have probably been exposed to the term, and those of you who are trans have probably been called this by idiots. The term trap is used to talk about cross-dressers, but is used interchangeably to refer to trans people. I'm not going to go into the origins of the word since I find it doesn't matter, because the implication of the word is enough to gauge why this word is bad. The implication is that trans people, femboys, or people that like to dress femininely, they want to trick you into having sex with them, because why else would they dress like that? And for those of you who don't think that's bad, let's move on to Chapter 3, Part 1, Stereotypes. So I'm going to list some of the stereotypes and tropes about trans characters and their origins. This is going to contextualize the slurs that we went over in Chapter 2. A lot of trans characters in media get portrayed as murderers, rapists, deceivers, groomers, sex-mad, mentally ill, being aliens, or all of the above if you're fucking Rocky Horror Picture Show. But for real though, I fucking hate that film and I had to watch that film twice for the fucking video, and if I have to suffer, so do you. Most of the stereotypes come from that one word that we went over in Chapter 1, transsexual. Remember when I said that it was an outdated medical term? Well, it was a psychological term, and I'm not sure if you know this, but mental health wasn't viewed in the best light back in the days. People would correlate transness with other mental disorders and mental illnesses because if you were trans, you probably had something else wrong with you in their minds. Felt fucking slimy saying that. The tropes of trans people and cross-dressers as murderers, rapists, and being deceitful have their roots in older movies like Psycho and Rocky Horror Picture Show. Blah blah blah, let's go on to Chapter 3, Part 2. My mental health is slowly deteriorating! Oh, and examples. I'm using Psycho as a good example of how trans characters are often portrayed as deceiving people for gain or for satisfaction. The murderer dresses up as their mother because they wish their mama wasn't dead. They're also a disturbed person because their dad died. They kill a girl in a shower dressed as a woman because fuck you. God, I fucking hate my life. And now we move on to Rocky Horror Picture Show. As alluded to, Rocky Horror uses every trans-misogynistic trope imaginable because apparently they want my therapist to make a fortune off of my trauma. So, Dr. Frankenfurt grooms a brainless childlike person for sex, deceives two people into having sex, and then raping them by tricking them into thinking they're having sex with their spouse, murdering their previous sex slave, cannibalizes their previous sex slave, is insane, homicidal, sociopathic, and hypersexual because fuck you. Do you know what makes me die on the inside? The fact that this fucking stinker is an icon of the LGBTQIA+ community. Other than the shitty earworms, I don't know why. Maybe because the LGBTQIA+ characters are aliens and can be viewed as an analog for how LGBTQIA+ people feel. But even then, there are works that aren't problematic that explore similar themes. Also, it portrays all LGBTQIA+ characters as evil aliens. Remember in Chapter 2 how I mentioned the theories of Ray Blanchard? Well, time to take that pen out because it feels like someone heard about that theory and decided to integrate it into Dr. Frankenfurt's character. Hypersexual? Check. Gender identity being linked to Dr. Frankenfurt's sexual orientation? Check. Not to mention how the Doctor is an alien from the planet Transsexual from the galaxy Transylvania! Chapter 3, Part 3. Why these tropes are harmful. If you know anything about the quote-unquote trans debate, you know that these tropes aren't just isolated to media. These are genuine concerns about trans people that cis people have. If you let trans women into the bathroom of their choice, then they'll rape women. Never mind the fact that the only way to enforce such a law would include invasion of privacy to trans people and cis people alike, as well as cis people being punished for looking trans when they go to the bathroom. Not only is this bullshit, but you could have a bearded trans man go into a woman's bathroom because they still have to deal with menstrual cycles. The idea of enforcing this law is not only transphobic, but unrealistic, invasive, and overall harmful, and does not address the issues that trans people face. This isn't exclusive to bathrooms. This also has to do with prisons, homeless shelters, and hospitals. People in favor of policing trans people tend to think that we shouldn't let trans people into facilities that align with their gender. I would go into it here, but I'm already working on 3 shorter videos about this exact topic, and the video is already pretty big, so let's move on to the next chapter. Chapter 3, Part 4. Some good examples of LGBTQIA+ rep, because serotonin. Because I want to sleep good tonight, I'm gonna go over some good LGBTQIA+ rep. Oran High School Host Club has some decent LGBT rep. My only problem being its terminology, but other than that, the main character Haruhi is non-binary, their dad's a trans woman who loves them with all their heart and protects them. Tamaki is in love with Haruhi regardless of their gender, and is overall good. Spoiler for those of you not caught up with the Owl House, walk away and skip to the timestamp below. Now the Owl House is really good with its rep. The main character, Luz, is openly bi. Amity's sister flirts with her and she becomes a blushy mess. Speaking of Amity, she's lesbian and Luz asks her out in season 2 and they're like a canon couple and they call each other girlfriend and it's so fucking wholesome. Ida, the Step On Me owl lady, had a past lover who was non-binary, and the reason they broke up was because of something outside of Ida's control, but they both have clear feelings for each other. And also, they have a non-binary character who isn't shit. Rain is a competent witch who is against the tyranny of the Emperor's Coven and the power structure of the system that just hard nerfs witches into existing in a state of mediocrity where they can only do one type of magic. It's just fucking give the fucking Owl House your money. In conclusion, while I think I'm right and I've backed up what I've said, I do welcome the possibility that I'm wrong about all this. I'm one girl with one experience and I do not speak for the whole community, but I've done my homework and backed up what I said so we can have a dialogue of how to better the state of representation of our community in media. Although I will say it seems like LGBTQI+ rep is getting there. Well, that was the spooky Halloween video. Thanks for watching. Good night. But even...